Hey guys, I have found a way to make rocks seem interesting. This is going to be fun. So far this year, when it comes to science, what we have done is study space and study the oceans. And for space, we went to a planetarium, which would have been so much cooler if it was open, but we did actually drive there. And then we just hung out in the museum because that part was open. And then for oceans, we went on a field trip. We went to a museum to see the sea turtles, and they have just a great exhibit for sea turtles. And you get to get a little stuffed sea turtle and take it in and see what you can do to help it heal it and all that stuff. It is fascinating, it's fun, it's one of the reasons that I chose to focus on sea turtles when it came to the oceans. But this month, we are moving on and we're going to be studying about rocks. And I will tell you, just full disclosure, I don't love rocks. I just don't think they're interesting. They're not very much fun, but I did find a lot of experiments and a lot of videos that take it to a point where at least it's enjoyable, even if it's not super interesting for me. And I'm hoping my kids will pick up on my husband's enthusiasm and excitement for rocks, because he loves to go rock hounding and he loves to dig up all sorts of things. He really, really likes rocks. And so I sort of pushed them over to him and let him carry the enthusiasm on this particular subject. But I also have a lot of things that I think are going to be really interesting. So if you have a little bit of enthusiasm, this is going to be perfect for this month. So week number 1, we are going over the rock cycle. We're just going to cover the basics of how rocks are formed and the different types of rocks there are. So there are actually 3 different types of rocks. There's sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous rocks. And we're going to be, this week is all about making sure you understand the basics of each of those. And so the first question, the curiosity question is, the temperature of Earth's inner core is about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And why do we need such a hot center? And that a lot of that stuff that's right at the very center of the Earth is rock if it wasn't so very hot. And so it's understanding what is at the center of our Earth and why does it have to be so hot. What I found as I've done this science so far this year is that I haven't got enough stuff, that it's just not taking long enough. And so we are spending a little bit more time on the questions and just letting them follow their own interest, and also spending some more time in the books, that maybe it isn't just the couple of pages that I set aside. I'm letting them look through lots of books and make decisions about what they want to be interested in pursuing just off of the books that we have available. So that is what I've discovered as I'm going through this year. I haven't created enough stuff, but I do know how to Google and I do know how to YouTube. So it's fun. We're just finding more stuff to pack in as we go along. As long as it's interesting and it's on topic, or even not on topic, if it's on interest for where the kids are, then we're going to pursue that and find lots of different resources that are just available. But this is the foundation. This is the jumping off point. So after we ask that question, we are going to use the book, How Everything Works, which we've used this book a lot through this year. We're going to keep using this book a lot through this year. I have not bought this yet. I just keep getting it from the library because they have it. Why not? The official pages that we're going to be using are these right here. This is actually going over the rock cycle, and it's showing you the pattern of, sometimes we've got some magna going on, and magna and igneous, that's the same thing. Sometimes there's metamorphic as it's getting squished and turned into mountains, and sometimes you've got sedimentary down here that's getting broken up by the water and put back into the process. So it just shows it on a very macro level so that they can see how that works. So I love the pictures in this. I love the descriptions. The kids sit down with me and they really stay engaged in this book really well. So How Everything Works by DK, actually, as you make that. I like DK. A lot of what they create is really useful. And another thing that I have discovered as I go through this is that it's really important to do the questions and the books first, because once I get into the movies and the activities, they're moving. You know, they're expecting to be a little bit entertained with the movies, and then they expect to be hands-on with the activities that we do. So the sit down, think about it part just has to come first for my kids. They do not want to do that after we're up and running. So the video that we have for this, I found years ago, and I love it. I love this guy. I love this video. He just does an amazing job. The images that he comes up with and the really interesting way that he explains the rock cycle is just fascinating to watch, and he has an amazing accent, so that's really fun to listen to as well. And so I love that video. It does a great job explaining the rock cycle. So now they've been exposed to it in the book form, and they've been exposed to it using video explaining how it works. And then we're going to go on into our last way of teaching this idea, which is hands-on, and this is what makes it cool. Okay, so First thing we're gonna do, I'm not opening this for this video because I have purchased this a long time ago and it's still here, which is kind of miraculous. And once I open it, it will disappear and I need it to still be available for our experiment. So what we are on that day going to open this, and once we get them out, for the sedimentary rock, we're going to cut them into different pieces because that's what sedimentary rock is. It's just big rocks that have been broken down into tiny little pieces down to sand, and that's the process of sedimentary rock and sort of being squished together. That is what that is. So that's the first one. Then once we have them in little pieces, we're going to take them and squish them together. So sedimentary rock is not just the process of being broken down, but it's basically layered rocks, right? It's just a bunch of dirt and sand and stuff that's sort of held together. Whereas metamorphic rock, there's a lot of pressure that goes into that. So we're gonna take our broken up pieces of Starburst candies and you just squish them, and that's your metamorphic rock. And once you have those nice and squished and tight, then you can stick them in a microwave safe bowl, or I guess you could do it different ways if you have a torch. I don't know how you can do it, but we're just gonna use the microwave. Stick it in the microwave, melt it, and then they can see, well, that's magma, right? That's melted rock. To understand that something that looks like liquid was actually rock to begin with, that was fascinating to me when I was younger. So I want to make sure that my kids understand that this stuff that is liquidy is actually rock, and everything melts. Everything has a point, a temperature where it no longer is solid. And that, I don't know, that kind of blew my mind as a kid, that I thought some things are always solid, like rock, and some things aren't. And knowing that actually there is a point where pressure and temperature are going to hit and everything will become liquid. So melt the starburst, and then you can kind of pour it out and let it harden, and that's going to be your igneous rock. And then you just break it and start all over again. And you say, this is going to break down into sedimentary rock again, because that is the rock cycle. So, and then I imagine a lot of starbursts are going to get eaten, and that's how that is going to end. So week number 2, we're going to focus on igneous rock, which means volcanoes. Now I know this is not kind of the first part of the cycle, but it's the coolest, so that's where we're going to go. And I'm going to start just by telling stories from my childhood. And I know this isn't super helpful to you unless you want to tell my stories, but I grew up in an area near Yellowstone Park, and it had all of these caves that had been created by volcanic eruptions, but not really eruptions. They were a cinder cone, so that it doesn't blow. It just sort of like seeps out and then cools off, and it creates these big holes underground, which are caves. And so as a child, well, as a teenager, I would go caving in those, as you just crawl down into a crack in the earth, and then you would weave your way through until you found the way out. And people had gone before, and so they said, hey, this is the path. You can go in here and then you come out over here. It's really stupid. I don't know how I lived through that. I mean, just considering how dark it was and how much I just was like, well, it'll probably be okay. And so I jumped and it was okay. But now I look back, I think that could have been a huge hole and I could have gotten stuck. And yeah, so anyway, I did that and lived to tell the tale, and it's fine. And my husband actually, so he was gonna go actually caving with, I think, some of my family, I don't quite remember, but when he got there, they found that there was like an entire group of scouts who had gotten stuck in the caves and they needed help. So he just stayed there and he was helping them out. He had a rope and he was pulling them up and he was getting each of them out, and they were escaping. And I just remember the story because it was so funny. As they were coming up, I believe it was my brother came up and he's talking to these kids and he's like, hey, how you doing? What are you doing here? And they're like, oh yeah, we're here with Scott, you know, and he was like, oh, that's cool. You know, who's Scott? And he looks up, he's like, oh, that's my brother-in-law. I kind of thought that we were gonna go caving together, but they didn't cross paths, and my husband ended up just rescuing scouts, but probably a good thing, right? Somebody had to rescue them. So both of those stories are kind of about how dangerous caves are, but I think that is something that, even though caves are really interesting, you gotta understand they are dangerous. You can get stuck in certain parts of the caves, and you do have to understand how to get in and out of them, because they're not made for human entertainment. They're natural formations, and you can go through them and you can have a good time, but you may find a spot where you really can't get out of because it wasn't made to be fun, you know, it just happens to be there. And so that's something that, that's my own personal experience with caving. I will probably have to think of another good positive story, because I don't want them to feel like rocks are scary or caves are bad or anything. And I actually do have some other stories of walking through caves and seeing the stalactites and the stalagmites and how fascinating they are. But I have personal stories about this, and so I can share it. If you have stories about caves, awesome. If you don't, then share mine. So I'll give you one positive one, so you don't have to have just all negative ones. There is a place that we walked up to the top of the mountains, actually. So most of the caves that the other two stories, you go to the ground and there's a hole in the ground and you go down and that's where the caves are. But in this case, we went way up in the mountains. Like I don't know how far, but I was really tired by the time we got there. And then you go inside this cave and it's just enormous. And you have all of these stalactites. I think stalactites come down and stalagmites go up. And they're just these formations that come from the water coming down and dripping off the end. And so it just leaves a little bit of the sediment as it goes down. And every time it drips, then it builds up the one that's coming down and it drips and it forms one that's going up as well. And so they're beautiful. They take forever to form. I remember feeling just kind of in awe at how big and how open this cave was, way different from my caving experiences where everything's just really close and you're having to sort of shuffle through. This was just a very large open space. And so there are lots of different types of caves and they're all kind of fascinating and exciting in their own way. When it comes to the book, same book, we're going to be doing several different pages. This one is obviously just about the volcano. And there are another couple pages in here that have just gorgeous pictures. Just, I don't know who took those pictures because that's awfully close, but it is really, really gorgeous pictures. And then there's also a page here on the volcanic islands, because that's really fascinating too, that a lot of islands that are out there on the Ring of Fire, they are formed from volcanoes, and over time they're going to go back under the earth just as they pop up and then come down as things get eroded and as they get built up, because all of the rock is coming from the volcano erupting every so often. This last page just shows the volcano that takes place under the ocean to form those islands, so that we can see volcanoes are pretty awesome. They can happen, you know, down under the ground, that they just sort of bubble up and create caves under the ground. They can happen where they have that huge mountain that blows its top, you know, that we're so used to seeing. That is actually not that frequent, but that can happen. And they can also happen under the ocean floor, which is what creates the islands. So it's really fascinating to see where on Earth you're most likely to have a volcano, and also what types of volcanoes there are available. So kind of go and get into all of those things in the book. And then once they have that sort of established, that knowledge, we'll watch this video. And all of these links are down in the description. So you can have all of these books, all of these links, everything. It's all out there. It's all free. We might have to get the book, I don't know. But then they're going to watch a video and it will explain about all the different types of volcanoes, where they are. Especially, I think it's really fascinating that there are only certain places on the earth that you're likely to have a volcano, and why that is. And so that video gets into that really well. And then the activity for this is actually kind of similar to what we did with the last step of the Starburst, because that was the Igneous step. But then this time we're going to get crayons. These are new. We're not going to be using these. We have a whole bunch of used crayons, and we'll just get those out. And you just basically melt the crayons, and you get to see what happens when you have solid things that are different from each other, different colors, different sizes, and they melt and they become one, and they become quite solid when it's all done. And you could color with it if you wanted, because now it is one rock. It is one crayon. And so trying to show in a very real way that is how volcanic rock actually, where it comes from, and how it forms and becomes such a solid thing, even though it was liquid to begin with. Okay, moving on to week number 3. We used to live right next to the Rocky Mountains, and it was really fascinating to drive along the freeway and see that the mountains didn't look like here's this layer and then here's this layer and, you know, we're building like this. They didn't look like that at all. They looked like some sort of really angry giant underneath had just like punched it up, and the layers went like this at this really stark angles, and it was not flat and nice and happy. Something violent happened that pushed these things up and created these really jagged edges, and you could see the lines moved at angles, and that was really fascinating to see. It was also a little like disconcerting, but it's also beautiful to see something so big and so gorgeous was being affected by massive forces beyond its ability to withstand, and it created these gorgeous Rocky Mountains. So to jump into the idea of mountains, we're going to ask the question, Mount Everest is 29,000 feet tall. Can you jump higher than a mountain? And just let them try. And frankly, any jump is going to work, right? Because a mountain can't jump. And so it's a trick question, and it just lets them to say, hey, I can jump higher than a mountain, then they can go show their dad how high they can jump. But it's just something to get them engaged, ask a question, and get them moving. The next thing, we are back again in this book, and we're going to do a couple of pages in there on mountains and mining. I'll show you. This is the one on mountain ranges, and you can see how it's showing the different pressure under here and how that creates all this upthrust and makes a mountain come into being by all the things that are happening below the surface, and that's what's creating this mountain range. And kind of because I just didn't have anything else to do when it came to mountains, that we're going to be studying mining as well, because a lot of mining takes place in the mountains. So we will be looking on these pages right here. And you can see how busy that is, how much stuff's going on there, talking about how the mining process works. And I know there are a lot of different ideas about whether or not it's right to mine. I get that, but I think not talking about it is not a good way to approach that. So we're going to be talking about the mining, and the video, one of the videos that we have, is actually going to be talking a lot about mining. And it's just from a how-to point of view, you know, how does the process go? Where do we start? And then what's the next step and what's the next step, to show what we're doing when it comes to mining. And you can have whatever conversation that you want to have about taking care of the earth. This is just, this is how mining takes place. That's that kind of video. And then we're going to move on to our actual activities. So the first one, we're going to take a bunch of blankets, and we have so many blankets, and we're just going to fold them up and make a big pile of these blankets. Then you stick something on either side of it, which honestly, I think I'm just gonna have the kids stand on either side of it, but whatever. You have something, and then you push it, and you can see what happens with all these layers of the blankets. They'll start to kind of crunch and pop up in some places and go down in divots in other places, and that gives you an idea of when something's flat, but then you have pressure like this, how's it going to respond? It doesn't just turn to dust. It doesn't disappear. Instead, it makes mountains and it makes valleys. And so that's a really good way to see how the pressures that come in from the sides and not just from the bottom are going to create that upthrust and that downthrust of the earth as well. And then I almost feel bad about this last thing that we're doing, not because I feel bad about doing it, but because I feel like I want to give you something that's mostly free, and this isn't free. We actually went out and bought it, but we loved it. We've actually done this in the past with my kids, and they got it for a Christmas present, and they had so much fun that I just thought this is just too perfect for this particular thing. We're gonna have to buy it. So you don't have to buy this, but I did. This is a Discovery gemstone dig, and what this is just a chunk of compressed dirt, I think, and then they give you a couple little tools, and then they can dig through and they find these gems, and it's so exciting because they're like polished rocks, and so they feel so accomplished when they're able to dig through there and find that. And for our field trip for science this month, we're going to go actually to a place where it's an Aurora fossil dig, which is near us, and you can go find some fossils in that area. And so I just really want the kids to get their hands in the dirt. They love it. They want to do that. It's also going to be a little colder because it's November, and even here in North Carolina, it gets a little colder. And so I don't know how long they're going to want to be digging, but I don't know. We just went to the beach today, and it's kind of cold, and we stayed there for hours. So they might just stay there for a long time. I don't know. It could be a lot of fun. Okay, that brings us to our last week, and we are going to be studying earthquakes and sedimentary rocks when it comes to this week. So here's the question. Tectonic plates are sections of earth that rub against each other and cause earthquakes. If the earth were the size of an apple, the tectonic plates would be the thickness of the apple's skins. How can they cause so much damage if they're so little? And this is something that can be quite confusing, this idea that it's just tiny. You know, why is it a problem? But I know somebody who was in an earthquake, and the people in her area, just like in her neighborhood, had vastly different experiences with the earthquake based on if they were downstairs on the bottom floor versus if they were upstairs a couple floors. It makes such a difference how far away from the surface you get. And if you don't know, the further away you get, the worse it is. If you're right close to the bottom, it's shaking, it's not good. But if you're way, way up high, you've got all that sway and all that motion and all the destruction that comes from that. So it does make a big difference. Even though it's a very thin layer, it can have just a massive impact on the things that are happening up above the earth, above the crust. So for the book, same book, we are going to be doing this page right here, tectonic plates, and looking at how they push against each other, because there are actually different ways that they rub against each other. Some kind of rub like that, and they kind of create a problem that way, friction this way. Some of them go like this, and then they pop like that. So then we move on to the video, which I think is just really helpful to be able to see these things in graphic form, to understand what they look like and how they're affecting things when you really can't just dig under the earth and look at it. So them putting these together in computer generated images is just a really beautiful way to explain this. So this is a great video. It explains all about tectonic plates. And then for the activity, we are actually going to create what is called a push and a pull earthquake. So here's what you do. You take one of these. This is just a styrofoam plate. And we are going to take 2 different sizes of sticks. So you've got your popsicle sticks, and then you have tongue depressors. Okay, so for the first one, we're basically trying to make a stable building and then an unstable building. So for the first one, when you go, you're going to take a pencil and you punch holes, 4 different holes. And this, there's a video about this, there's instructions about this. I don't know if there's a video actually, but there are instructions in the description. I'm just showing you how. So you punch holes, you punch 4 different holes, and then you take little miniature marshmallows, and they're basically your glue, and you stick the miniature marshmallows in those holes, you sort of let them settle in, and then you use your big tongue depressor ones, because they're going to be more stable, and you shove it in and let it sit and let it stabilize. Then you can stick more marshmallows up here, and you can use more of your tongue depressors to build around. So you have the 4, and then you can create stable ones between, and you make a stable structure. Then you do that same thing without punching the holes in the plate. Instead, you just set 4 little marshmallows on it, and you put these little guys in the marshmallows, and then you can use marshmallows on the top to create the top structure so that you are a little bit more stable. And now you have this one, which is not stable, and the other one, which should hopefully be a little bit more stable. Then you take these and you put 2 books on the floor. This says use 4. I'm not sure why. Maybe because of the carpet rubbing. We have hardwood floors, but whatever. So they have 4, 2 that are on the bottom that don't do anything, and then they have 2 that are on top of that. And that is where you set your plate, is right where those 2 are. And so it is right on that tectonic plate. And then you're going to move those books in a specific way. Sometimes you'll move the books like this a little bit. Sometimes you bang them together a little bit. And each time you have the kids are doing all of this. So then the kids will write down and say, well, how did it withstand? Not only from the sort of weaker one to the sort of stronger one, but with the different types, how did it withstand? And if you made it 2 stories high, how did the top story withstand the pressure versus the bottom story? And so just really letting them experiment with this idea of how does all of this work? And we also have blocks. We have Kiva blocks. And so we could do Kiva blocks that are stacked like this versus when they're stacked like this and they're kind of skinny like that. But whatever you have, whatever way you want to create this, the point is to try different structures and then have those books be moving underneath them so that you can see what happens when things start getting shaken up and how do different structures handle that. And then it just depends on the kids' interest. If they really want to go into that further, we can watch some videos on earthquakes and see exactly what we've done as far as our structures to be able to withstand that kind of pressure and that kind of movement. And that wraps up the entire month of November when it comes to studying science this year. I feel like that was a really long video. I hope it gets shorter when I edit everything out, but I just want you to know that what you're doing is really, really important. Teaching your kids, being there for your kids, you're doing really important things and they really matter, and you're doing a much better job than you think you are. Keep it up, and I will see you on the next one.